In 2007, Nokia was the most powerful phone company on Earth. They had over 40% of the entire global mobile phone market. Not 40% of a region, 40% of the entire world. Their phones were sold in over 150 countries. Their brand was more recognizable than Coca-Cola in parts of Europe and Asia. They had more engineers, more patents, more manufacturing capacity than any competitor on the planet. And then, Apple released a phone with no buttons. 6 years later, Nokia sold its entire phone division for $7.2 billion to Microsoft, a company that would then write off that investment as a total loss just 2 years later. But here's the line that haunts this story. When Nokia CEO signed the final papers of the sale, he said this: "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And then he started to cry. This is Silicon's strategy, and today we're asking the question that line demands. If Nokia didn't do anything wrong, then what exactly happened? To understand the fall, you first have to understand just how high Nokia climbed. Nokia began its journey in 1865 as a paper manufacturing company in Finland. Over the decades, it diversified into rubber, cables, and electronics. By the 1980s, it had started making moves into telecommunications. Think about that. A company that started making paper in 1865, almost 100 years before the internet existed, eventually became the defining company of the mobile age. Nokia's real breakthrough came in the 1990s when it shifted its focus entirely to telecommunications. It launched mobile phones that were affordable, durable, and user-friendly. Between 1998 and 2007, Nokia was the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world. Its market share peaked at over 40%. In the 1990s and early 2000s, owning a Nokia was a statement. The build quality was legendary. The battery lasted for days. The signal was the strongest in any room. People didn't just buy Nokia phones, they trusted Nokia phones. And Nokia knew it. Nokia made one major mistake other than adapting to trends. They believed that their name would make their audience run to stores for their smartphones, even if they were late. That belief, that brand alone was a fortress, would become the first crack in the wall. Then came January 9, 2007. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and held up a phone with no keyboard. No buttons, just glass. The audience laughed. Some people in the tech world laughed too. A phone with no buttons? How would you type? How would you feel the keys? It would never work for serious users. Nokia's executives watched, and they were not impressed. Nokia's management made key strategic errors, including underestimating the shift toward lifestyle-driven smartphones like the iPhone and overvaluing the demand for mobile phones and cameras as standalone products. Nokia's logic was straightforward. Our phones are better hardware. Our build quality is superior. Our signal strength is better. Our battery life is better. A beautiful touchscreen is a gimmick. Serious users need real keyboards and real buttons. They were right about the hardware. Nokia's hardware was genuinely better than the first iPhone in several ways. They were catastrophically wrong about what the future of phones actually was. One of the critical mistakes Nokia made was focusing too much on hardware and not enough on software. In the smartphone era, it wasn't just about building a good phone, it was about creating an ecosystem where users could download apps, access services, and sync their devices with other platforms. The iPhone wasn't a better phone, it was a different object entirely. It was a computer in your pocket. It was a platform, and Nokia was still building phones. Now, Nokia wasn't blind. They saw Android coming. They understood the threat of ecosystems. And here's where the story becomes genuinely painful, because Nokia actually had a choice. Google approached Nokia about adopting Android. Nokia could have used Android, the same operating system that Samsung, HTC, and LG were about to ride to global dominance. They said no. Nokia declined to switch to Android because Samsung was much stronger, and executives were afraid to compete against them in that ecosystem. Read that again. Nokia refused Android because they were afraid of Samsung. They didn't want to fight Samsung on equal software ground. So instead, they decided to fight Apple and Samsung with their own operating system, Symbian. After realizing their mistakes, Nokia created the Symbian OS, which they used in their smartphones, but it was a massive failure. The Symbian OS was not compatible with many apps, had developer ecosystem issues and usability problems, and was not comparable to Android and iOS. Symbian was designed for a world before touchscreens. It was built for button-based phones. Forcing it onto a touchscreen smartphone was like putting a diesel engine into a sports car. Technically it works, but it was never built for that. Developers hated it, users hated it, and the apps, the things that made iPhones and Android phones magical, simply didn't exist on Symbian. Cocky leadership, a lack of vision, and inferior technology were the unholy trinity of errors that contributed to Nokia's downfall. They ignored implied customer feedback, lost customer loyalty, and failed to keep up with evolving services and tech. Inside Nokia, people knew. This is perhaps the most tragic part of the story. Nokia wasn't a company of incompetent people. They had brilliant engineers, researchers who understood smartphones better than almost anyone. Rather than a lack of ideas, poor middle management prevented innovations from reaching the market fast enough. Nokia had the ideas, Nokia had the talent. What Nokia didn't have was the ability to act on either. The fall was attributed to entrenched bureaucracy that stalled decision-making, destructive internal competition, and a failure to recognize the importance of lifestyle devices, such as the iPhone. The matrix structure Nokia adopted created a system where every decision had to be approved by multiple departments with competing priorities. By the time an idea survived the internal approval process, the market had already moved. Frequent disagreements within management on strategy and execution led to uncoordinated efforts and reduced the effectiveness of decision-making. The company's once innovative business culture grew more rigid, hampering creativity and slowing its ability to respond to market changes. Nokia had become a company that was better at managing internal politics than building products, and in the smartphone era, that was a death sentence. By 2011, Nokia's market share had collapsed. The company was bleeding cash. The stock price had fallen by over 60% from its peak. And so Nokia made its final bet. In 2011, Nokia made a bold decision to partner with Microsoft using the Windows Phone operating system on its new line of Lumia phones. The logic seemed sound. Microsoft had resources, Microsoft had enterprise relationships, Windows Phone was a clean, modern operating system that wasn't Android, so Nokia could differentiate itself. But there was one fatal problem. Windows Phone lacked the developer support and app ecosystem needed to compete, making it an unattractive alternative. Instead of collaborating with Google to adopt Android, which could have revived Nokia's hardware appeal, the company tied itself to a struggling platform. Apps. Again, it always came back to apps. Users didn't want a beautiful phone that couldn't run WhatsApp. They didn't want elegant hardware with no Instagram, no Snapchat, no games. The apps were the product. The phone was just the container. Nokia had bet on the container. The world had bet on the contents. The alliance with Microsoft was the worst of all decisions, launching very interesting phones, but not what consumers wanted after flirting with Android and Apple. By 2013, Nokia's mobile phone business was in free fall. The alliance with Microsoft had failed to revive the company's fortunes, and Apple and Samsung were dominating the global smartphone market.
Nokia, once the king of mobile phones, had been reduced to a second-tier player. Nokia sold its mobile phone division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. The sale marked an era. And Microsoft, after paying $7.2 billion for Nokia's phone business, wrote off nearly that entire amount just 2 years later. The acquisition was so catastrophic that it became one of the worst deals in Microsoft's history. It took only 6 years for Nokia to lose around 90% of its market value, and the company never recovered. From 40% of the global phone market to zero in 6 years. So, back to the question. Nokia CEO said they didn't do anything wrong. Was he right?
In a narrow sense, yes. Nokia built great hardware. They had real technology. They made logical decisions given what they knew and believed at the time. But in the larger sense, no. Nokia made 3 decisions that together destroyed them. First, they confused their product with their identity. Nokia believed they were a phone hardware company. They were actually a communication company. And when communication moved to software and ecosystems, they had no answer. Second, they let fear make their strategy. They refused Android because they were afraid of Samsung. They chose Microsoft because they were afraid of losing control. Every major decision in Nokia's final years was driven by what they feared, not by what their customers wanted. Third, they built an organization that could not move. The matrix structure, the bureaucracy, the internal politics, all of it created a system where the brilliant people Nokia had could not get their ideas to market fast enough. Speed is strategy, and Nokia lost the speed war completely. Here's what I want you to take away. Nokia's CEO was wrong. They did do something wrong. Not in the products, not in the engineering, but in the mindset. They believed that being the best at what they'd always done was enough to survive a world that had stopped caring about what they'd always done. Blockbuster believed their stores were their strength, and stores became their cage. Yahoo believed their portal was their product, and the internet moved past portals. Nokia believed their hardware was their moat, and the moat dried up overnight. The pattern is always the same. The thing that made you great becomes the thing you can't let go of, and the thing you can't let go of becomes the thing that kills you. Subscribe to Silicon Strategy, because understanding these patterns, really understanding them, might be the most valuable thing you ever do. I'll see you next week.